Can a fail actually be a win? That's what I've been wondering since I saw Fail Army on TiVo Stream 4K, and I spent a few nights down that rabbit hole. And you know what? Some of the biggest movie production failures of all time actually turn out to be great movies. I'm gonna start off with the movie that was basically the 60s Wonder Woman, though I think this one had an even bigger budget and impact. The movie Cleopatra that came out in '63 had all the top actors of that time, with Elizabeth Taylor front and center. Just how big of a failure was it? Well, first off, Elizabeth Taylor was sick for 4 months, so they managed to shoot just 10 minutes of the movie and spent like $7 million. Translate that to 2021 cash, and it would be more than $60 million for 10 minutes. Then the original director got fired. Then the next director said he'd agree to do Cleopatra if the big producers bought his company. They got to work, they spent more money, then boom, Liz Taylor got into an affair with her co-star Richard Burton, and since they were both married, the press had a field day with it. If that wasn't enough, that new director also had a grand vision to make a 6-hour movie, which, as you've seen from Zack Snyder's Justice League cut, that doesn't work out. Cleopatra was eventually cut down to 4 hours, the director was fired, then hired again, and that's how we got this classic as we know it. The total cost? $44 million. Do you know what that means in today's money? Almost 400 million. Yeesh! Another movie that almost didn't stick the landing was Jaws. Richard Dreyfuss, one of the main actors, put it best. We started the film without a script, without a cast, and without a shark. Talk about sink or swim. Not only that, but that iconic shark from the poster was actually a nightmare in itself. All in all, there were 3 mechanical sharks involved in the production of this movie, and all of them were prone to malfunction. It got so bad, Spielberg actually called Jaws the Great White Turd, and his rage was understandable since he was almost decapitated by one. During a test, the director put his head in the shark and, wouldn't you know it, he got stuck there, with the crew having to pry open those jaws. Still, in the fail or win, sink or swim gamble, Jaws did come out on top. This movie made all the money back in a single weekend.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This next movie has been printing money since the 70s, and I think it will keep on doing that even when this planet turns into Tatooine. Yep, I'm talking about Star Wars. George Lucas was apparently a pretty difficult dude to work with and always loved cringe dialogue. Just how many failures happened there? Too many to count, but I'll give you a few. First off, even though they shot in Tunisia, which is pretty much a desert, they had to deal with a freak rainstorm so bad it was the worst the country had seen in 50 years. George Lucas wanted to do a long poem in the beginning of the movie. You know, when that text is flowing on the screen? Fortunately, Brian De Palma stepped in and convinced them to cut the gibberish and go straight to the action. Then, Mark Hamill had a car crash and forced Lucas to use a double. Oh yeah, and on top of regular production headaches, most of the actors thought they were doing a kids movie with not much potential, so none of them really took it that seriously.
Wow, this is cool!
Yeah, everyone in the neighborhood has one.
Can you imagine thinking you're gonna do a movie that might flop and end up a sci-fi icon for the ages? But when it comes to pure production fail, or literal hell, Apocalypse Now takes the cake and shares it with none. This movie is near the top in my TiVo Stream 4K, and I love watching it with others just to tell them what went on behind the scenes. Coppola summed it up best by saying, "We were in the jungle and little by little we went insane." But that quote doesn't do the insanity justice. This movie was supposed to be shot in 14 weeks, but a typhoon ruined most of their equipment. Filming eventually stretched out to more than 2 years, with the government of the Philippines lending them the same helicopters they were using in combat. Even before the crew went crazy in the jungle, Coppola struggled to find actors willing to take the role. Marlon Brando was paid $3 million, but he didn't want to be on set, refused to even learn his lines, and showed up weighing a lot more than when he was initially cast, which forced him to throw away all the costumes prepared and film his scenes in the shadows. And talking about the money, Coppola ended up financing most of the movie himself. He put up $30 million of his own money and put his own house up as collateral with an interest rate that started at 7% and went up to 29% by the end of the shooting. Talk about a gamble. Fortunately, Apocalypse Now was a huge success, making more than $150 million. By the way, did you know that George Lucas was supposed to direct it? Harvey Keitel was also supposed to be in the movie, but after he was fired, Martin Sheen replaced him and had a heart attack, and then delivered the best performance of his career.
You've heard of Colonel Walter E. Kurtz? Your mission is to terminate the Colonel's command.
Terminate. Terminate with extreme prejudice.
But none suffered quite like Jim Caviezel in The Passion of the Christ. Jim Caviezel really suffered for this role, and it wasn't self-inflicted stuff. For one, the armor Jim was wearing didn't really protect him from the whips, so he felt most of that. Then he dislocated his shoulder carrying the cross. Oh yeah, and he got struck by lightning when he was preparing for the Sermon on the Mount. Yep, this dude survived a lightning strike and went on to make this movie. Think about this the next time you see this movie with your family. Also, if you're like me and rewatch classic movies over and over again, wait for a rainy day and play the original Blade Runner. Seriously, sometimes my TiVo Stream 4K is just a glorified way to watch the same 5 movies in a loop, with Blade Runner front and center. Did you know Harrison Ford spent about 50 nights drenched in artificial rain? That's probably why, for a long time, he absolutely refused to talk about the movie. And that's just the main actor. The director himself had plenty of difficulties. Ridley Scott was so hated on set, it's a wonder he didn't quit. After he told some UK media he preferred to work with UK crews, his American crew got so mad they started wearing t-shirts saying, "Yes, Governor, my ass." So, did he take it back or apologize? Nope, Scott actually started wearing a t-shirt with "Xenophobia sucks" written on it and ended up producing the best sci-fi movie of all time. You know what they say, if at first you don't succeed. That's a lesson perfectly pictured by Mad Max Fury Road 2. This movie was about 80% the real deal, with a minimum of CGI used and plenty of footage shot. All in all, there were 470 hours of footage to edit, which took about 3 months just to watch before even starting to cut. You know that great on-screen chemistry between Furiosa and Mad Max? Turns out the actors, Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy, actually spent more than 6 months of shooting arguing like crazy about anything and everything. Theron wore a green arm cast at the time so they could CG her hand away and accidentally hit Tom Hardy in the face, breaking his nose. Hardy himself was also pretty on edge and eventually apologized to director George Miller for his behavior. Both actors said that the roles were very intimidating, especially since they had no script to follow and had to rely on George Miller to understand what type of movie he had in his head. Couple that with half a year of sitting around in the desert shivering and swallowing sand, and you bet tempers were high. Another production that involved massive headaches was that of The Abyss, released in '89. The actors sunk to new levels of despair trying to do those water stunts. Reportedly, Ed Harris actually punched James Cameron after he almost drowned, and the director didn't stop the shot. Harris also broke down crying in his car after a particularly bad day, and Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio had a breakdown as well. Why? For one, the water in the tanks was chlorinated and they had to spend so much time in it, they actually had skin burns and their hair turned green or white. To this day, neither of them want to talk about this movie. Couple that with ruptured pipes, floods, goats invading the set, and even a bomb threat, and you have the recipe for a disaster. James Cameron didn't fare better himself, having almost drowned when trying to set up a scene. He actually said, "I knew this was going to be a hard shoot, but even I had no idea just how hard. I don't ever want to go through this again." Well, spoiler alert, he did. About 8 years later, after The Abyss, he did Titanic. You know how that turned out, and you can imagine how much water damage was involved. Just to give you a hint of what went on there, many in the crew got seriously hurt when the hydraulic-powered ship failed. But their dedication paid off, not just at the box office, hitting that billion mark, but also at the Oscars with 11 awards. So yeah, that's one way to turn repeated failures into massive wins. I swear, Fail Army should do a supercut of all the crazy things that can go wrong on a movie set. What about you? Did you ever try to do something just to fail miserably and eventually turn that into an awesome win? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if you're there, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell button. Your support is what keeps us going.